Hey guys, this is Navonod. I've decided to make a video for PokerTube. It's been a long time since I've posted anything on there. I've been trying to get my YouTube site up and running, but I don't know, not a lot of luck there. So anybody who's watching, if you like what you're seeing, you have a chance to check out Navonod Poker, or you can check it out as New School Poker Strat on YouTube. Take a look at it. If you think that's something you're into, please subscribe. Now this is, and tell your friends, this is going to be a video focused on exploiting kind of probably mostly bad players because we're playing at NL10. This is going to be about gathering intelligence, stereotyping, taking notes, and then putting all that information into play. So one thing that I am a huge proponent of when we're playing, especially this is a hyper, it's a turbo anyway, hyper turbo, super turbo, not sure what they call it on Bovada, sit and go, but it's fast. So here's some things we should be looking for. Activity levels, aggression, bet sizing patterns. One of the things that I think is massively important is to watch for what I call signs of life. And what I mean by signs of life is anything that shows us that our opponent might actually be reasonable and decent. And just FYI, guys, I've already put the callouts up, so pay attention to the callouts if you can. And I'm going to try to kind of keep pace with them, but I'm definitely not scripted, and I'm kind of free-forming this, free-flowing it. I have a pretty obvious spot here, but it's also a good opportunity to get a little bit of information on the guy in the 5 seat, or not the 5 seat, but the, well, player 5. He has open raise from sort of an early position, and it'd be interesting to see if we can expect that this guy who's open raising is able to open raise from EP and then fold to a 3-bet, and he is. That might be a sign of life. A lot of when I say sign of life, I mean a sign that he might be regular, he might be reasonable. Somebody who's opening and never folding to a 3-bet is probably going to be pretty bad. Somebody that's open raising from under the gun and then flat calling a 3-bet might not be great either. It's a spot where you would expect to get 4-bet or folded, in especially a format like this, by somebody who's pretty good. So that's what I mean by signs of life. So the idea is take a ton of notes, never ever ever be sitting idle and not paying attention. Your money in these games, I'm convinced, comes from paying more attention to your opponent's play than they pay to your play. And of course being able to put the correct adjustments to work. Just as a side note, this Mike A, I believe it was, I started a conversation with him later on in the tournament. We didn't sit in together. There's no funny business going on. I've extended an invitation to him for coaching, and I am going to probably just kind of give him some advice because I'm pretty sure he's going to be watching this. And he's the 7 seed, just FYI. And I was able to figure out some of his leaks and imbalances, so we'll talk about some of those, but not just his, you know, everybody's. So when we're playing a tournament like this, we need to quickly stereotype or archetype our opponents, and we want to have some kind of information to go on when we're in sort of a marginal spot. And even though like split second really quick stereotyping or archetyping is not going to be perfect, it should be enough to break ties, at least in what would be really borderline situations. So for instance, the 3 seat just open limped, right? And he open limped in middle position. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us quite a bit. It tells us he's probably not fantastic, for one thing. And now we get an ISO raise from player 1, which is another sign of life. Good players like to isolate. So we should get some information here. Player 3, he limped in, then he called an ISO. So if we get to see a showdown, we'll have a really good idea of what kind of hands he's limping with and how he reacts to a raise with at least that type of hand. Also, he tanked and checked, so we can maybe get a timing tell from that. And he checked again. We're expecting the 1 seat, he probably is decent. I mean, at least he's ISOing and betting him. We expect him to probably barrel a ton on this turn. It's easier for him to rep a flush or a straight than it is for player 3, because player 3 would be normally expected to check raise a board like that if he had a draw. But that was kind of a cooler situation, and out goes the reg. So I think that the game just got better for us. But really, I think pause and reflect on that. Really pause the video, take a look at this. This is an absolute treasure trove of information. And what have we gleaned? Like, what have we gleaned? We should have figured out all kinds of stuff from that exchange. I know I'm going fast, but definitely go back and take a look and see what there is to see. I learned a lot from that exchange. And read the callouts. And if you need to pause and read the callouts, definitely do that. I was taking a ton of notes. I was trying to pay attention, but another thing is you have to kind of prioritize your attention span, because you're not going to be able to pay attention to everything. So paying attention to the things that are most important is going to be, I mean, massively important, and plus EV. And the things that are most important are going to be things that are out of the ordinary, things that are really bad, things that are patterned, and if you have the opportunity, and I know it isn't always going to work out this way, especially in a fast-paced tournament, sit and go, but if you have the opportunity, all else equal, you ought to be paying the most attention to the player immediately to your right, and probably the players immediately to your left, and then kind of branch out from there. It doesn't always work out that way, of course, but all other things considered equal, we should really be trying to do that. And that's because the players to your left, all of your steal attempts are going to go through them. Players to your right, you're going to be playing pots against them in position, and we know that money flows clockwise around the table, so we're going to win money from the players that we have position on. So it makes sense to try to really, I guess, figure out what propensities they have. Now, this is a tough spot here, and I think this is a situation that's going to depend a lot on our reads of our opposition. And we can definitely ISO raise there, or we can just take a flop. And I elected to just take a flop because of the fact that the player in the 3 seat didn't seem to like the fold very much, and he had done some kind of, I would say kind of sneaky things. Not real sneaky, like check raise and then nut flush draw on the turn is not super sneaky, but it at least shows some kind of level of danger and competence past what you'd expect from just a total fish. Another absolute gem here. Pause the video. Read that. And we learned a lot from that exchange, right? I mean, if we're paying attention, and I know it's going to be tough to pay attention to what I'm saying, and it's going to be tough to pay attention to what I'm saying and what I'm doing, and the call-outs and the notes that I'm taking. So this is another situation where you really need to focus in on what the most important details are. And if something is important enough that I put a call-out on it, and the call-outs, if you don't know, are just those little arrows and circles and those little bleeps. If it's something that I thought was important enough to put a call out on, it's probably something that you ought to read. So if you just want to watch the video passively, I don't know how much you're going to get out of this video because I'm jam-packing a lot into it, but this is a video I think you could take away a lot of good information from if you watch the video actively. Okay, so that's another interesting thing that happened. This is pre-flop Razor, who open raised, and then when it went three-way to the flop, he just checked and folded. So that's got to mean something, and we should be paying attention to what that might mean. I think it's also kind of interesting that the blinds have escalated pretty fast already in one of these turbo speed type tournaments, and the 5 seed is still using a 3 times the big blind raising size, and that's a sizing tell to me that means he's probably not great at poker, or at the very least he doesn't really understand bet sizing. And again, the 7 seed, this is real odd, and if we get to see a showdown here, if you get to see a showdown here, pause it, think through it. I don't remember if this goes to showdown, but if it does, you ought to be able to learn a tremendous amount. And I don't mean necessarily learning a tremendous amount about poker. I just mean if you were in this game, put yourself in the situation, think of all of the things that you're learning about these players based on the actions they take. And sometimes the actions they take can tell us a lot about not just what kind of hands and ranges they're going to have in the situation we're witnessing, but also through inference we can figure out if they're doing action A in situation B, action 1 in situation A, and they take a different action, then that can tell us what they don't have in another situation. Sorry, lost in hand verbally, I guess there. So, pay attention, take notes. Definitely put, the first thing you want to do is try to label your opponents and stereotype them as just archetypical villains. And I use this color code, and the color scheme I use is orange is tight aggressive, yellow is like weak, tight passive, blue is like drooly, like calling station fish, red is aggro, and green is moderately aggressive, or somebody who seems to be changing gears or has more than one pace. They have more than one gear. Yeah, another interesting little bit of intel. Yeah, I would say, guys, it wouldn't be such a terrible idea if you just hit the pause button every single time one of these callouts pop out, and just see what I'm trying to get across. Because again, I'm not narrating and then hitting the callout button, which I often do. I thought maybe I could get more layers of strategy in just by doing the callouts completely separate. Now, it took twice as much time for me to do it that way, and I'm not sure it's going to be the easiest way to watch and understand and learn passively, but I think it's going to give you a good opportunity to get a ton out of one video if you're willing to put in the work and the time of actually using it the way that I intended it to be used. Okay, so queens here, I mean, this is pretty obviously going to be a situation where no matter what the action is, when we're at this depth and we're just in this position at this depth against these types of players, we're going to raise and get it in like all the time. Open limping from early position. Now, a lot of times this is a play that players will make with pocket pairs, and a lot of times they'll make it with just pocket aces. A lot of times they'll do it with stone bluffs, if they're limp raising, that is. And this could be kind of tricky. He's in under the gun +2, so he's not, or I'm sorry, under the gun +1, so he's not UTG. But when he ships it here, as he's about to do, it really is a gross spot. And well, when he limp raises, it's a gross spot because he reps aces. But we've got queens. If we get stacked there, it's just a cooler. I don't really think we're able to get away from it there. I know a lot of players will use variations of this. I've got a pretty good poker buddy I talk poker with on a pretty regular basis, and he plays live, and he's pretty good. He was really good as an online grinder back like pre-Black Friday, and he absolutely does still use this strategy. And I shouldn't say still, he started using the strategy again to have an open limping range under the gun, and just specifically at live 2-5 cash games. He will limp under the gun with his huge hands like aces, kings, maybe queens, ace king suited type stuff. And he limp raises a lot of, and he's limping with pocket pairs, he's limping with speculative hands also, and he wants to be able to get in and see a cheap flop. So kind of the way he's balancing his limping range is by limp raising some big hands. It's definitely debatable. I don't think it's a good strategy online where aggression is so normal anyway. But I know that he will limp raise, and he's a pretty good player. So I mean, it's got to be. It can't just be completely terrible. Now this is a spot I want you to really pay attention to. Pause it. Pause the video. Seriously, pause it. Read that. Why is this guy blasting into me? And this is 7, so this is this is our boy. But why did he donk into me? As pre-flop raiser, I am probably going to see-bet that flop a lot, right? So why is he donking into me? There is a reason. It's our job to figure out what that reason is. A lot of times it's going to be a draw, and he's going to bet big, and we're probably just going to have to fold. But we get to the river, and he makes another tiny donk. Now pause the video. Look what happened. we just gained a massive amount of information. I mean, we basically just got a window into his entire approach to the game. He is donk betting with hands that he does not want to face a bet with. And so we can exploit that information by being able to read his ranges very well when he does use a donk bet. And if we have like something like top pair with a good kicker and he makes a small donk bet trying to stop us from putting in a big bet, we can actually make it backfire on him because he's trying to pot control. Basically, he's trying to control the size of the pot from out of position, and you should not allow bad players to do that. So if he puts in a small donk bet because he doesn't want to put in a lot of money on the flop, but he's got some kind of showdown value that he'd like to get to the next street with, we can really hurt him bad by making small re-raises. And I think that we can take that type of player who's donking like weak made hands, and we can really hurt him a lot by just making small value raises and making slightly larger but still small bluff raises. And even when it doesn't get it done then and there on the flop, say if he bets third pot and we pop it like maybe double his bet plus a little bit, it sticks him to calling with a pretty wide range, and he's probably going to either bet small on the turn and fold to a raise or check fold the turn, and we win a bigger pot than we really ought to have. Also, if our opponents are donking into us and we'd have just absolutely no equity, and it's a spot where we would have made a continuation bet had they checked, then they just saved us our continuation bet, right? So it's really not a great strategy to just mindlessly donk, and it's definitely not a good strategy to donk exactly hands that you don't want to be raised, you don't want to have to put a lot of money into. And let's also think about what that's going to do to Villain's checking range. If he's donking all of his mediocre and weak marginal made hands, what the hell is he checking? So I would say, right off the rip, we could say that if he checks instead of donks, and we're in position heads up, we can probably just bet our entire range and just take it down, just print free money. If he's donk betting his marginal hands, then he's only checking like what, nutted value hands and air, maybe draws. So he's not going to have a lot of nutted value hands compared to the number of just air balls he's going to have. And even when he has a draw, he's going to miss a lot of those. So it's going to give us a situation, it's going to put us in a situation where when he checks, instead of donk betting into us, we are able to kind of value bet with nothing. Just, it's almost a value bet if it's a wet board, because he's going to be maybe check calling his draws and folding on later streets. And same thing with his air. I mean, we're not value betting, we're kind of bluffing against his air, but we expect him to check fold an awful lot when he has a donking range but elects to check. And if he check calls, then it's probably going to be a draw or a monster, and there's just a lot more draws than there are monsters. It's just, more than anything, it's when he's got a donking range that doesn't make sense, it's an imbalanced donking range, and we know what his motivation is behind it. It's a little bit like he's just turning his cards face up and just allowing you to play very, very good and make really good decisions against him and put him in a lot of tough spots. And far be it from him pot controlling out of position, it's actually going to allow us to bloat pots bigger than we otherwise would have been able to do. So like if we have like a top pair top kicker and he bets a third the size of the pot, if he had checked, maybe we would have bet half pot and he would have maybe had to call with his second pair. But if he donks, now we can bump it quite a bit bigger than what would have been a half pot bet, and he's still getting a pretty good price to continue. I remember in game here, I had a really strong suspicion that player 4 had exactly king queen. I think I subconsciously picked up a tell, like a timing tell or something. Anyway, back to the action at hand. So we are, hopefully by this point in the game, if you were playing this tournament, you would have notes on every single player. And if there's a couple players that you don't have notes on when we get to this point in the game, I would sort of, and I do sort of assume that they're weak passive type players. And I'd look at their stack size and see if it's relatively close to their starting stack, that they're, or just enough to where they're slight losers. That they're probably, the reason that you don't have notes on them is because they're not doing anything. So they're probably just like tight and passive. And I would make a note that they are tight with, say, a few question marks after the fact, and just sort of adjust that, obviously, as more information became available. So note-taking, figuring out your opponent's imbalances, seeing what they're doing badly or unusually, or even seeing what they do well, all of these things are going to help you avoid the good players, play pots with the bad players, and optimize a strategy that's going to work to pick apart your opponent's strategy. I mean, even players that don't play well, most of them are not just randomly clicking buttons. So even if there isn't a good reason to do what they're doing, there usually is a reason. This is a spot I think players get wrong a lot. Pause it. We had kind of a tight player. It looks like he was being, playing fairly tight, but he's so short stacked, and we've just got a pair of fours. So we're usually going to be, we're going to be not in real great shape against his overall range. But when you look at the massive pot odds you have, and you take software like Equilab, or if you still have a copy of Poker Stove somehow, or some kind of equity calculating software, put in pocket fours against any reasonable range that would, say, open shove 8 big blinds or whatever it was that he had there, or even less, say 10 big blinds, whatever, or 6 big blinds, whatever the case was, even just a normal 10 big blind shoving range, pocket fours are going to have a decent chunk of equity against that range. I mean, you're going to be behind it, but I mean, against a lot of ranges, especially if they contain all of like the suited ace X's or even all the ace X's, which they probably will, you're going to find yourself up against like ace 2, ace 3, ace 4 some of the time, pocket 2s, pocket 3s some of the time, and overcards the majority of the time. And it's obviously only when he's got a pair bigger than your pair that you're crushed. But even at that, you're not as crushed as, I mean, you're still almost 20% to win the pot by showdown. So when you're getting like 3 to 1, even 2 to 1, it's probably going to be fine to make a call. And that's, of course, if there's not a tremendous amount of ICM or bubble pressure on you. And I'm not going to talk too much about ICM here. It'll come up probably in the end game. And we're getting close to the end game here. But ICM is independent chip modeling, and it just refers, really, it's come to describe situations where you're playing to maximize not your chip EV, but your tournament EV, which is different because, if you win every chip in play and take first place, you don't get 100% of the money that was put into play. You don't get all the buy-ins. So it's not worth as much money to gobble up every chip in play. And if you bust, let's say you lose all of your chips, but you're the last player to lose all their chips, you finish in second place, you get paid to lose all of your chips after the other players lose all of their chips. So it's clearly going to be different strategy than just cash game strategy. The closer you are to the bubble, the more true that is. The bubble being, like in this situation here, I think, this paid 3 spots, so there'd be 4. When there's 4 players left, that would be the bubble. Okay, so he jams, and we obviously have a pretty clear ISO raise. Now, pause it. What did we learn? Pause it. We learned a lot right there. Okay, what I think we learned is we really have a good soul rate on this opponent now, which is fantastic because he's sitting to our right. And I think he seems very much like a player who might be good for, say, like 2006. He's using a lot of the old tricks that really don't work anymore against good players. But one of the things he's done is sort of like a Harrington on Hold'em thing. He just open shoved a pretty weak hand from under the gun, and I'm sure he did it because his stack was short and the blinds were about to run him through. So he wanted to jam while he still had fold equity with a hand that probably was not plus EV to jam with. So the thought process that he may have is when he's short on chips and the blinds are big, he needs to capitalize on his first in vigorish, and he needs to capitalize on his fold equity, and being the first player to put all of your money in the pot is so important at this stage, and this is true, that he may have about the same range of hands from every position. And that was something that was actually advocated for certain M's, certain certain stack sizes based on the blinds and antes in the Harrington on Hold'em series. He did say, and this is incorrect by the way, but he said that, or wrote that in a lot of these spots you should have the same open shoving range from under the gun as from the button, because when you're on the button you have plenty of time to look for a better spot, you have more hands to see. But when you're under the gun, the closer you are to under the gun, the closer you are to the blinds, the less opportunities you're going to have to pick up a decent hand and go with it. And I mean, it kind of sounds like it makes some sense, but in reality it doesn't, because it really, the bottom line is simply your play is either plus EV or it's not plus EV. And when you're making your play, the deck has no idea that you're about to take the blinds. It doesn't care. The mathematics don't change. And so here's a spot that I think is really close, because again, he's shipping it from under the gun. And we've already seen that he's willing to do that wide because he doesn't want the blinds to run him through. And he's also shipping it when the big blind is sitting out. So ace deuce offsuit would not have been a very bad hand to call against him. But the other thing we have to consider is there was a player that was pretty well priced in. So he probably knew that he wasn't going to get a lot of folds there, which means he's going to have a stronger range than he would otherwise. And our ace-2 offsuit, had we elected to play it, would have had to beat two opponents. And ace-2 offsuit is a hand that plays pretty terribly against exactly two players. Or really, it plays pretty terrible against any number of players other than one. Okay, so this is going to be just a simple pot odds decision here. We just count out the money that's in the pot. Oh, it just got more complicated. Okay, so now it's a not simple pot odds situation. I think we can call here because we are getting good immediate pot odds, and we can expect that our opponent is not going to bluff us very often because this other guy's already all in, so where's his incentive to bluff? So we're going to get to realize all of our equity a lot of the time. We're going to get to actually see all 5 cards probably the majority of the time. You count times like that where I pick up a draw and kind of go with it. And mathematically, I think that was just the correct play. Plus, there were some ICM considerations also. Again, not going to get into that too much now. Against most players, I would just shove here. You know, if I'm playing heads up against a heads up opponent, I'm just going to ship it in his face. But I feel like this player is one that I want to keep pots as small as possible against, and I do want to have a min-raise range. I think he's going to play so straightforward that I can afford to min-raise some garbagey hands and fold to a jam, which would be kind of disastrous if you were playing against somebody who's going to reshove light or bluff an awful lot. And plus, I think playing flops with the information I have, like right here, because we know that he's donking an imbalanced range and he's making a small bet here, I'm looking at a very dangerous flop that should hit his range pretty damn hard. But I know that I can value raise him here because I know that he's doing this with hands like Jack X, 8X, maybe draws, and also probably like some janky Queen X hands. So here's a spot now where I think I can still value bet, but it's going to be pretty thin. And I just expected that I could get a little extra value by taking advantage of the fact that he's going to make bad plays out of position, which, you know, is pretty much what happened, right? If ever you're going to have a calling range, heads up, Queen 10 suited should probably be in it. I mean, Queen 10 suited might be the very best hand to flat call out of position against an opponent heads up. So since I am going to have a flat calling range, Queen 10 suited is going to be part of it. If we were deeper, I would consider calling here and doing sort of a float, expecting that he's going to check some turns back and I can make some river bets. But I just feel, because I've got backdoor equity, a lot of it, kind of. I've got 3 to Broadway and backdoor heart draw with 2 overcards to the 8. So I had some equity, and if we were a bit deeper, I would have been inclined to just flat call. Plus, I'm not going to have a lot of ace-x, and neither is he. I think, well, I mean, there's 2 aces on the board, so. So really, I think on that ace-ace-x flop where he raised pre-flop, I called and I had Queen 10. It wouldn't even have been a terrible spot to just check raise as a bluff. I'm in the middle of having a conversation and kind of networking and maybe trying to drum up some coaching business here. So I think I did miss some things, but a couple little spots anyway. So again, if we're going to ever flat call, I think 8-7 offsuit makes some sense to be in our flat calling range. Now this is a spot I should be donk betting. This is a spot where my range hits that flop way harder than his. If you look at the stack to pot ratio, if you look at the amount of money that we have behind compared to the blinds, I'm not going to have a big calling range here. But my calling range is going to have a lot of stuff that connects hard with 9-10, and that means I should have probably just let into him. Because, well, I mean, he does have some propensities to, like, c-bet, bluff catcher, and showdown value type hands, so against him, it probably makes some sense to go for the check raise. This is the spot in the hand that I really think I butchered. This has to be a bet. This has just got to be a bet. When he calls... when he checks back the flop and calls the turn, he's got ace-x, he's got 5s, he's got 3s that he's trying to get to showdown, and he's got busted draws, missed draws a lot. I think probably a lot of his range is going to be busted draws and like random ace-high overcard combos that would not be able to call another bet. So I do think I botched that one, and I was a little tipsy last night playing this hand, this game. A bit hungover today, in fact, but even still, I think if I would have not been so gabby on the typewriter there, I might have been a little bit better. So here's some more leaks. I was telling him that I was going to point out some of his leaks. It's a leak for you to allow me to play this type of poker game heads up. Now, I know you can't possibly be thinking that, or it's pretty unrealistic for me to think that you're thinking you're at a huge disadvantage post-flop. But I think you are, because of some of the other imbalances, some of the other leaks that I found, and that I've been able to exploit and will continue to exploit. And because that's the case, and because really just standard game theory optimal poker is not going to include a lot of flop seeing type scenarios when we're this shallow, I think that you should be playing a lot more shove or fold, and then maybe have a limping range. But I think you should be shoving. I'm talking to Mike now, or whoever's like in his virtual shoes here. You ought to be shoving over my min raises with an extremely huge range. It's going to be very plus EV in a vacuum, and you won't have to take flops with me. I also think you should be playing basically fold or shove against all of my min raises. And I think now you should be playing a game that is very much just all in or fold. And I think that's been the case for a while now, for quite a while. I mean, when you're down to, say, 16 big blinds effective, there's not a lot of room to do anything but shove, fold, or maybe open limp. Now, the reason I'm able to min raise at this depth against this opponent is because he's not shoving a wide range against my min raises, which is a leak. You should not be calling this shallow out of position facing a min raise. It's going to be you're just going to be check folding on the flop far too often. and it's just way too profitable to just ship it against me when I make a min raise and have to, like, if I min raise off a, say, 12 big blind stack and have to fold, that's horrific. It's awful for me. And it's really worth you opening your range and gambling a little bit in order to try to get that to happen some of the time. And also when you shove and I call, even if you've got the worst hand, you're still going to win some of the time. So it's like, I think of it as, say, 20 big blinds or less. When your opponent makes a raise that's non-all-in, and you've got fold equity, shoving a wide range, I look at it kind of like when you check jam a flush draw on the flop. I mean, when you're check jamming a flush draw on the flop, you've got like 30-some% equity when called most of the time. Well, if somebody raises non-all-in off a 20 big blind stack and you ship it on them, they're going to fold a lot, very often. And even when they call, it's pretty often you're going to be at least 30-some% equity. And, you know, you just don't have to worry about getting outplayed post-flop, which is especially a problem when you're out of position. So that's another leak, is allowing me to see flops at this depth when I shouldn't be able to. Min raising and letting me see the flop with queen 10 suited instead of just shipping it in my face. Letting me min raise and just calling me and taking a flop. So definitely your end game and heads up game needs some work. And I've got a host of videos, tons and tons of videos on heads up play. I think you ought to look at them. Really take a look. And I'm sorry if some of the things I've said have been insulting. It's not my intention. I'm really, and see, like, if you're ever going to have a folding range, 4-3 offsuit probably ought to be in it. So yeah, I guess until next time, guys. Hope you got some good stuff out of it, and good luck, guys. Good luck.